Welcome to the Australian Finance Podcast, a podcast for people who want to learn more about their personal finances and get the most from their money. This series is hosted by Kate Campbell from How to Money and Owen from Rask Finance.
The Australian Finance Podcast is provided for educational purposes only. The information is general in nature and does not take into account your needs, goals, or objectives. What that means is the information does not apply to you specifically. So consider getting the advice of a licensed and trusted professional before acting on the information. Welcome to episode 14 of the Australian Finance Podcast, Kate.
Yes, we are going to be talking about the power of compound interest today.
Wonderful. And this comes through from a request on Twitter, I believe it was.
Yes.
Saying that we should cover compound interest in a little bit more detail.
As it's one of the most important financial lessons.
Mm-hmm. We've kind of beat around the bush a bit with talking about compounding.
Yeah.
And we're going to just flesh it out a bit.
We probably will mention compound interest in every single episode, and every finance article you'll see something about compound interest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you will, because like you said, it is probably the most important thing anyone needs to know about finance. And if you can wield its power, then ultimately you're going to set yourself up for success later on in life. Okay, so let's talk about big picture before we get into what is compound interest, the dictionary definition. I just want to talk about why we want to save money and what it does. And for me, having thought about it this a bit, we want choice in our lives. So choice allows us to have control. And so when we think about things like, do I want to coach my kids' soccer team in 10 years, or do I want to put them in after school care because I'm going to have to be working late hours or whatever? Or do I want to be able to take my family on a holiday or not? Do I want to be able to go stick it to my boss because I don't need to work here or not, right? And that's a bit flippant, but it's about having the choice and control over your own destiny. And I think that's what money does for me. And I think for most people's definition of financial freedom, that's kind of like what it is. And so when it comes to what's required to get to that position, I think obviously we talked about essentials. One of the things being that you need to be in control of your budget. Yeah. Right. And everyone needs to know that they need to spend less than they earn. And what they need to do with the difference is compound. And this is why we say it's probably the most important tool in your kit, right? Spend less than you make, compound the difference. Yeah. And so Albert Einstein, I think, called it the eighth wonder of the world. But why don't you flesh it out for us? What is compound interest in a nutshell?
So you've got your $50. Actually, $100 is easier to go with. So it's in the bank and you're getting 3% interest per annum, which would be amazing. I'd like that right now. So by the end of the year, theoretically, you'd have $103.
Yep.
But because the money, so you're going to get your interest payment each month. So whatever that is, I should have calculated it. But so you get that portion, 1/12 of 3% each month. And so the following month, you don't just get interest on the $100, you get interest on the $100 plus the interest from January. So... And then you just
interest
keep
on interest.
Yes. So by the end of the year, you'll have earned more than $3 in interest. And then that just keeps snowballing. Obviously, $3 is pretty it won't
small.
even buy you a coffee in Melbourne. But when we're talking about a larger amount of money, so $100,000.
Or your superannuation.
Yeah. That really starts to compound. And bank is lower level. But if we're talking about investing where you might get a 7% return, and you, instead of getting that income paid out to you or spending it, if you actually reinvest that 7%, then next year, instead of getting returns at 7% on your $100,000, you get it on your 107
Whatever.
and
107 plus. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So what you're saying to us is that we get not only the interest or the returns on, in this example, the $107,000 or the $103, we're getting a little bit more each and every year. Yeah. And then over a long period of time, and with a lot of money, that turns into a big difference, right?
Yeah. And it's the snowball effect. So here's some numbers I did prepare earlier
because
go for it. $103 isn't working. Okay, so we start with $0.
Mm-hmm.
We're depositing $1,000 every month for 30 years,
Mm-hmm.
and we're having a 7% per annum return.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of 30 years, you're going to have around $1.2 million.
Wowza.
And most of that is actually going to be made up of the interest or
Right.
that 7% interest rate you're getting. So in total, you have only deposited $360,000, and $860,000 of that on top of that will be interest. So, if you have a look at the charts we'll put some in the show notes, also having a look at the ASIC Money Smart calculator, which we love, you'll actually be able to see at the start, you'll be putting in your $12,000 a year, and it won't look like much. You won't be getting much in terms of returns. But as that snowballs and you reinvest that 7% return every single year, over 30 years, you're ending up with a massive pile of money that can sustain you during retirement. And that's just your regular $1,000 every month, 7% return. So we're not looking for anything insane.
Spectacular, yeah.
Yep, you don't have to find some risky investment product to get that. You can just invest in a diversified portfolio.
Yep, okay. All right, let me give you a hypothetical question, Kate. And let's say we have a 20-year-old plans to retire at 60, right? And they save $36 a week and they put it into their investments, right? And let's say we have a 50-year-old who puts $1,000 away a week. So $36 versus $1,000. And they both want to retire at 60. Who comes out with more money?
Well, it's going to be the 20-year-old.
Yeah.
I'm assuming the 50-year-old doesn't have any other savings.
Yeah, so so in this scenario, the younger person who saves $36 a week versus the older person who saves $1,000, the younger person still comes out ahead.
Yeah.
And why? Because of time. The longer you allow your money to compound, the greater return it's going to be.
Yeah. And that's in your 20s and 30s, you have a lot more time and you can really make use of this snowballing effect on your wealth. So putting your $1,000 in, even that can be even less if you're planning to look on a 40-year horizon. And I think that's probably the hard thing, visualizing 30 years time, because you're locking your money up for 30 years mentally in this plan, and it's so far away and just seems like out of reach. But if you put the steps in now and you just let it snowball in the background, you can really make a massive difference to your retirement.
I think a way to think about that, to bring down the time, like the way mentally to shorten the feedback loop, if you like that positive cycle, is to think about it. And you'll hear people say this a lot. Like, the first $1,000 to save is the hardest $1,000 to save.
Yeah.
The next one probably take you just over half as long, and the one after that, less than half of that again. And it's like, it doesn't matter if it's $1,000, $10,000, $100,000. Once you get to that one domino, it's like everything else falls into place quicker behind that. And the reason why it does is because of compound interest. You get to a point, and then the money that you already have invested is working for you. And all of a sudden, everything just falls into place. Like, I remember back when I was younger, a friend of mine sent me a message saying, "Hey, how good is this? I've just got to $100,000 net worth."
Wow.
Yeah, and I was like, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Hey, this guy was in his mid-20s, right? So he saved. And he got to that $100,000 and he was just over the moon. But I don't know his personal situation, but I imagine now it's a lot more than that. And we're only a few years on from then. So my point is that it took him 7 years of hard saving and life choices, but he got there, and I reckon he'd be 300 plus, 400 plus. It's only a few years later. Once
you hit around that $100,000 mark, it just starts going crazy in the background, even if you don't add anything else to it.
Because, like you said, if you have 7% return on $100,000, that's $7,000 a year. Yeah. If you think about it, you're not actually doing anything to get the 7%.
And if you're reinvesting it, then it's just going to snowball in the background.
That's it. Then next year it's going to be $107,000, and you're going to be earning 7% on top of that because you're allowing it to compound again and again and again. And your savings goals are just going to fall like dominoes. So the point is, there's three things. We've talked about these. Time, the amount of time you have to invest. Obviously, the longer, the more compounding. Yeah. The amount that you save, obviously, the more you save, the more you have invested. And the last one is the average return. So how much are you getting? And if you stick your money in a savings account, probably not as good as shares.
No. But I think it's also, if you're starting in your 20s, then you don't need to be putting as much away.
Mm.
Whereas to get the same results starting 20 years later, you're going to have to be putting a lot more away every month in terms of what you're investing. So time's really on your side if you're in your 20s.
Yeah. Another thing is that this can also go against you. Like if you've ever felt like you're running a million miles an hour, but you're not getting anywhere because you have credit card debt or something like that, you're experiencing the opposite of compound interest. Yeah. It is effectively the bank is earning compound interest and you're paying it.
Yeah.
And that's why people say with compound interest, he who understands it earns it, he who doesn't pays it. And it's so true, right? Yeah. That's why you and I have said before, if you're paying more than 10% on some debt, get rid of that before you start investing, because that's going to suck the life out of you quicker than your investments are going to earn money.
If your debt's accruing interest at a greater rate than 7%, then 7-10%. Because your investments might be growing, but your debt's growing faster. True.
And we've talked about this before, is that one of the variables is how much return you're getting for your money. So obviously 7% is better than 3%. That's just basic maths. But obviously we got to consider the risk as well. So some people think, well, I'll just make riskier investments and therefore I'll make more compounding. That's not the way it works. You get to a certain point where the amount of risk you're taking overwhelms the returns you're going to get, and you end up going backwards. So that's why 7% is probably a reasonable figure, a reasonable expectation. But if someone's promising you 15% returns, 20% returns, obviously no one can make that type of promise.
Yeah.
Obviously, the higher we can compound, the better. That's why I invest in shares. We've covered this. That's why you invest with robo-advisors, ETFs, etc., because that's where we feel we get the best return.
I think it's also important to note that without having to go for an aggressive product, you can build wealth outside of investing. Not investing, putting your money in just a term deposit. If you're investing in shares and various similar products, you don't need to be greedy. You can just put that money away, get your average return, and build a substantial amount over a 30-year time frame. It does require patience. It does require building a plan and sticking to it. And you have to be able to withstand market
gyrations.
Yeah,
that's a big one. Temperament, right? If you're going to sell out as soon as something goes wrong, if you're investing in shares, you're never going to compound.
Yeah, if you keep selling things, compound interest does not work.
Yeah, I'll throw it out there just as a final life lesson, I guess. So everyone's heard of Warren Buffett. You can't see this. I'm staring at him on the wall here. I've got a picture of him in my office. But
pink lipstick.
He's got pink lipstick. I should put it on Twitter. I'll put it in the show notes. So Warren Buffett, we all know him because he's a billionaire and greatest investor that's ever lived or whatever. He was worth $300 million at his 50th. When he blew out the candles on his 50th birthday. I think it was his 50th, yeah. And he's about 86 now, 87. And he's now worth the better part of $90 billion, right? So when you think of those numbers, 300 million, you think, almost 90 billion.
That's a bit more than just normal compound interest, I think.
It is, but when you think about it, right, it means he earned more than 99.7% of his money after the age of 50.
Yeah.
Right? He was a millionaire when he turned 30, just before he turned 30. So if you think about that, he was already wealthy, but he wasn't extraordinarily wealthy until later in life. And the reason why, it's not because he worked 99.7% more hours in the day. It's because he let his investments compound. And those compounding returns allowed him to achieve that later on in life.
Yeah.
So that's that's like an overwhelming and ghastly example of how things can go really well.
Yeah.
But it's a small example. That's why older people tend to be richer than younger people, because they've had time to let it compound. So that's a lesson. We've got some great resources in the show notes.
A few more articles sort of going in depth on compound interest and giving some examples. And I definitely recommend having a play around with the ASIC Money Smart calculator. It's probably one of our favorite calculators of all time. So I much prefer it over the school calculator. But that's really good to play around with different scenarios. And really, you can look at how the numbers look at a 10-year time frame, and then suddenly you put 50 years in, and then just the wealth just goes crazy. It's amazing.
You'd be surprised. Like, I used to spend hours on this thing. You'd be surprised at how little you have to invest now, less than $500, whatever, to get to that $1 million mark or whatever in a certain amount of years.
Yeah, so if you start early, you can start small.
Yeah. So just, I think, have a look at those things, have a play around, share it with your partner.
Yes.
Yeah, get them to have a look at it while you get on your mobile and just say, how much can we save? Let's have a look at what we can do.
Yeah.
And then just track your goals from there.
And I think it's very motivating once you have a look at, even if you think, I can only save a couple of $100 a month right now. If you have a look at what that looks like over the long term, then I think that makes you a lot more motivated to save rather than spend that couple of $100, because you can see that it can pay off over a longer period of time. It might look like not much over a year or two, but over 30, 40, 50 years, it can really change your standard of living in retirement.
For sure it can. Okay, well, we've talked a lot about this, but it will get brought up in future episodes, I'm certain, so it's probably worthwhile us going into a bit more depth. But if you have any questions, be sure to send them to us. How to Money Australia on Twitter.
Yes.
Yep, I'm Owen Rask on Twitter. howtomoney.online website and the raskfinance.com website, or you can just Google Australian Finance Podcast and hopefully it would pop up.
Yes.
Have you done that?
I haven't Googled it.
I think we do.
We should Google ourselves.
We should make sure. But you'll find us Australian Finance Podcast and ask a question. We'd love
to hear
requests
from you in our next question episode.
Yeah, cool. All right, Kate, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Owen.